Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the ZapSec Modernization Series. My name is Carl Schneider, Vice President at ZapSec, and I'm joined by Hitesh Kumar, who is our Senior Security Architect. Now, I want to talk about a pattern that I think is the single biggest structural problem in enterprise security today. And it's not a threat, it's not a vulnerability, it's the budget. Enterprise security spending has gone up every year for the last decade, and the breach frequency has gone up right alongside it. So it's more money, more tools, but the same outcomes. And nobody in the boardroom is asking the obvious question, hey, what if the way we are spending is actually the problem?
Yeah, and the uncomfortable part is that CISOs know this, right? Every CISO I talk to knows that they have too many tools and they know there are overlapping capabilities. They know there are shelfware licenses that they are paying for, but nobody is using it. But the pressure to buy is relentless because every board meeting asks what was purchased to address the latest headline. And the answer that satisfies a board is we bought X, and it's never we redesign the architecture.
Right. And it's a vicious cycle, right? Let me describe it because once you see it, you can't unsee it. So a breach makes headlines, and the board asks the CISO, are we safe? Are we protected against this sort of a breach? The CISO's team obviously going to evaluate the threat and determine what the gap is. Generally speaking, there's going to be some tool that a vendor has that addresses that product or that tool, that gap, and the CISO requests budget to acquire it. The board approves it because the alternative is accepting the risk of the headline threat. So the tool gets deployed, and then the board's satisfied. But 6 months later, a different breach makes the headlines, and this whole cycle repeats. It's a new gap, there's a new tool, there's a new budget request, new deployment, additional complexity. And after 5 years of this, the enterprise has 30, 40, 50 security products. Each one was a rational response to a real threat at a specific moment in time. And the total effect is an environment so complex that the security team spends more time managing tools than actually managing risk.
Yeah. And here's what we see when we come in for an assessment, right? The average large enterprise we work with has between 45 and 75 security products deployed. And
Wow.
not categories, right? Products, individual products. And when we map the actual enforcement coverage, there are always gaps. Not because the tools are insufficient, but because nobody designed the integration architecture between them, right? You have an identity tool that does not feed signals to the segmentation tool, a SASE platform that does not receive device posture from the endpoint tool, a SIM that ingests logs from like 30 sources, but it cannot correlate events across them in real time because the data formats are different and nobody built the normalization layer between them, right? So every tool works in its own silo, but the architecture does not as a whole because the architecture was never designed. It was accumulated over time.
Right, right. So the tools work individually, but the architecture doesn't. So what does that actually cost the enterprise? Because the board understands cost.
Yes. And there are three costs that never show up on the security budget slide. First, it's the operational overhead. Every tool requires configuration, maintenance, updates, training, and staffing. So when you have 60 products, your security team spends the majority of its time operating tools rather than operating security. So we have assessed environments where 70% of the security team's time goes to tool management, right?
Wow.
That's not a security team. That's an IT operations team with a security label on it. And secondly, we have coverage gaps from the integration failure. And the gaps between tools are where attackers live. An identity compromise that the PAM tool detects, but the SASE platform does not act on because they are not integrated. A lateral movement that the segmentation tool could block if it received the endpoint alert, but the two systems do not share signals, right? So these are not capability problems, they are architecture problems, and they exist in almost every environment we assess. And thirdly, it's the mean time to respond. So when an incident occurs, the analyst has to check multiple consoles, correlate alerts manually, and reconstruct the attack path across disconnected systems. So every additional tool adds time to that process. So we've measured environments where the tool complexity has added at least an hour to response incident response times, right? So 40 minutes to an hour is the difference between containment and escalation.
Wow, yeah. So let me share how to translate that for the board, right? Because the hidden tax of tool sprawl is your security team spending most of its time managing tools instead of actually managing risk. And the gaps between your tools are where the breaches happen. And when a breach does happen, your response is slower because of the complexity you've built. You're paying more to be less effective. That's the trap, right?
Yes.
So what is the alternative? Because telling a CISO to stop buying tools is not realistic. The threats are real. The board demands action. So what changes?
What changes is the sequence. So right now, the pattern is identify threat, buy tool, deploy tool, hope it integrates. So we have to follow an architecture first alternative. So it is where we design the enforcement architecture, identify which capabilities are missing from that architecture, then procure specifically to fill those gaps. But when you start with the architecture, three things happen. First, you discover that you already own the capabilities you're not using because they were never integrated. Second, you identify the actual gaps. So, what are usually the integration gaps, not capability gaps? And third, when you buy with a design intent, not a headline reaction, right? So, the tool
Hmm.
has a defined role in a defined architecture.
Right. And the part that matters to the CFO is that strategic architecture first spending is almost always lower than reactive spending because you stop buying redundant capabilities, you stop paying for shelfware, you invest in integration instead of new licenses. So the total cost of your security program goes down while the actual effectiveness goes up.
Yeah.
And that's the business case. Again, that's what CFOs want, business cases. And that's how a CISO should present it to the board, not as a request for more budget, but as a plan to spend the existing budget better. Reframe architecture investment as risk reduction, not overhead. The board understands that language. So if
Yeah.
you're a CISO heading into a budget cycle and your plan is a list of new tools, I would challenge you to try something different. Present the board with an architecture rationalization first. Show them what you already have, where the integration gaps are, and what it would cost to connect what you own before you buy anything new. You might be surprised at what the board responds to when the conversation shifts from we need more to we need to use what we have better. So, Hitesh, how can ZapSec help a CISO make sure they can actually achieve that outcome? What's the secret sauce that ZapSec has for that?
Yeah, so we have a unified security service architecture that aligns all of the elements of the tech stack to the stated goals and outcomes of the business. So at ZapSec, we have a comprehensive stack of blueprints, frameworks, and automation accelerators to help enterprises enforce continuous risk-based adaptive access across a multi-vendor stack. So this enables organizations to maximize the benefit of their existing security tech stack, right? So we also have a security architecture rationalization assessment to help you get started. So where we map your current tool estate, identify the integration gaps, quantify the operational tax, and design the architecture that connects what you already own. It typically pays for itself in eliminated redundancies within the first quarter.
Wow, that is awesome, Hitesh. I mean, it sounds like the perfect solution for a CISO to optimize their spend.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate your watching. Don't forget that ZapSec helps companies modernize their infrastructure to maximize ROI and minimize threats. We do cybersecurity and SecOps every day. We've been there and done that. And if any of this resonates to you, we'd welcome a conversation on how to bring this sort of transformation to your organization. Visit zapsec.com or reach out to Hitesh myself directly. Our email addresses are visible at the beginning of the video.